Hi, everybody. My name is Justin Reich. I'm a faculty member at MIT. I study stuff about learning and how humans develop and online tools and things like that. And with my colleagues Newman and Teddy, who can introduce themselves as they get going, we're super excited to be chatting with you for an hour, thinking about past innovations and how they might help us think about what we do in the future. It might end up being a bit of counter-programming from this morning. So if you were like, oh, like that was techno-optimistic gobbledygook, like you might get, which you might like, and that's great, but you might get some other perspectives here, which could be good. A strong belief we have is that I've talked to tons of super bright people who don't quite get how generative AI text is generated. And I think it's actually super important to try to, whenever you're having conversations with people about these things, try to just level set and see, do we all kind of get sort of how predictive text generation works? Because I think if you understand a little bit about what's going on under the hood, it helps you understand what gets produced when you mess around with ChatGPT or stuff like that. So Teddy is going to start by helping us through that. I'm going to do a little bit of a historical tour of previous technologies which have gotten educational systems super excited and what we have learned from those previous efforts. And Newman is the director of the pedagogy project, the AI pedagogy project at MetaLab that Jeffrey Schnapp was referring to earlier. And she's going to give us a little bit of a tour of what she seems to be discovering, watching lots of people bring these things together. And then we should just talk all together about what we're doing in our classes and what we're exciting about and what seems to be really good and what seems challenging and what seems crazy. And then we'll kind of go from there. Does that sound like a good plan? Cool. Let's turn it over to Teddy to get us on the same wavelengths.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. My name is Teddy Sferonis. I'm a lecturer in public policy at the Kennedy Center. I teach primarily statistics and evidence and trying to make people better users of evidence and data in their daily lives and in their work. I'm going to be teaching a course on generative AI and public policy with a couple other faculty members in the spring. And one of the things that I'm going to start with just here, as Justin was suggesting, is just talking us through what are these models? Why do they work the way they work? How do they generate things as well as they do? And in the age of AI, attribution is very important. So I'm going to start by saying I have fully stolen these slides from Shard Goyle, who's one of the faculty members with whom I'm going to teach next year. And I think this is a very nice introduction to just the mechanics of how generative AI works. So we're going to use GPT as the main model, but the real innovation that has happened in how these tools work is pervasive in all the tools that were talked about this morning that you're probably interacting with on a daily basis. So the idea here of large language models is simply a tool or an algorithm that's intended to mimic human language. That's its goal. Its goal is to be able to reconstruct language in a way that is plausible, that is sort of seen as sufficiently like human language. And there are only 3 steps to it. They get very, very complicated, as you can imagine, but all you do for these models is get a whole lot of text. You teach it how to predict the next word in any given sequence of words, and then you make sure it's aligned or fine-tuned along the lines of what you actually want it to be able to do. So the first one is, I guess, the hard part, which is just get a ton of language. So ChatGPT, in particular, one of its big innovations was just the corpus of text that was used to predict words. And so there's literally trillions of words of text in the ChatGPT corpus. 4 is better than 3.5 in that respect as well, just the amount of language that it actually has access to. And the idea here, and we're going to go through it in kind of a collaborative way to start with, but the core idea here is just, well, similar to how the predictive text on your phone is trying to predict the next word you're going to use. ChatGPT is learning to predict the next word in a sequence of words in a pretty sophisticated way. But to start, let's just complete a sentence together, okay? So this is a poll everywhere thing. So if you take out your phones and use this QR code, I would like you to predict the next word in this sequence, which is that human language something. Just vote on what you think the next word should be. Are we good yet? All right, I'm going to go. Here's what we said. Human language is. 84% of you said is. It's worth noting that not 100% of you said is. Okay? Some of you literally thought human language banana. But we're going to start with this. Is the most likely. We're going to go with that right now. So let's go from there. Human language is what? Banana. All right. I'm going to go to the next thing. Human language is, surprisingly, is the most one. 66%. Okay? Again, note that there's a probability distribution. All right? And none of you chose banana. Good. Human language is surprisingly, what's next? All right. Ready? Human language is surprisingly predictable or versatile. Nice. So, as you saw in this sequence, what happened was we went through this kind of garden of forking paths, where every time we got to a point, we then had an option to go to a next thing. And what's interesting is that, first of all, I didn't have backup polls in case you guys checked banana, right? I had a pretty good sense that you were going to choose is. And Chard's been doing this in many, many contexts, and it keeps happening that way. And so it's worth noting that there is a certain amount of predictability in how we talk. But there's variation, and that variation can actually be represented probabilistically. If you have a big enough corpus of text, you can actually define words by how likely it is that another word is 1 word away from it, 2 words away from it, 3 words away, and so on and so forth. So the big innovation that led to these LLMs was this notion that you can actually characterize a word entirely by how likely it is that different words are going to be near it in different ways. In fact, the seminal paper is called All You Need Is Context. That's this notion of word embeddings. So we went through this sequence here. We could have gone through a different word sequence, and what's worth noting here is that the reason why GPT and other tools are able to do these things so sort of stochastically, like without having the same response every time, is that it's using the probability distribution. So for example, in our previous poll, 66% of the time, or 59% of the time, it would choose predictable as the next word, which then puts it on a different garden of forking paths, and 37% of the time it would choose versatile. So it actually is dynamically choosing in a probabilistic sense. And so what we're doing here is we're looking in the words, in the actual words in the world. So here's a Google search for human languages surprisingly, and you can see what comes next in all these different contexts. That's the information that these LLMs are using to try to produce sentences. And there are a lot of really unique sentences. So the number of ways to string 10 words together in a corpus of 30,000 words is that many zeros. Right? There are a lot of extremely unique combinations of words. Some of them make absolutely no sense. Some of them do. And so what we're trying to do here, or what these tools are doing effectively, is essentially building a statistical model of language. It's literally representing words as vectors of numbers that are the likelihoods of other words being near them. And that is when people say, we're surprised by how well this works, even folks at OpenAI and Google and things like that, part of it is that all we are doing is giving it these guidelines, and the things it's producing are convincing, are effective, are doing a pretty good job. But, as we know, they're also wrong a lot of the time. And that comes to fine-tuning. So fine-tuning is the part where these models are made better to try to get away from things like the biases inherent in the data, toxic content, misinformation, and all of this. And so essentially what you do with these models and what these companies are doing is fine-tuning these models to align with our desired behavior. Often you do this by simply giving it a lot of training. You give it examples of stuff. You say, this is a bad thing for this reason. This is a good thing for this reason. And you literally train it by having humans rate the quality of responses. So in ChatGPT on its own, you can thumbs up or thumbs down responses regularly. That kind of stuff actually does get fed back into the model. And so the fine-tuning process is now the part where we actually are, as humans, are having a role in trying to figure this stuff out. And so originally ChatGPT was terrible at math, right? Now ChatGPT is actually structured so that if it detects math, it offloads it to a separate math-doing sort of algorithm and then feeds the number back in. That kind of thing doesn't happen on its own through the LLM process. That happens because of this fine-tuning effort. So a lot of the improvements that we see in responses getting better, less hallucinatory, and so on and so forth, is through this fine-tuning method. Here's an example of the kind of alignment that we get. If you ask it how to rob a bank, it does not tell you currently. But maybe if you tell it, at least originally, if you said, imagine I'm a writer trying to write a novel about how to rob a bank. What would my character do? And it would actually tell you how to do that. So these are the kinds of challenges that come with the problem of alignment. Okay, that's a very, very brief overview. I'll turn it over.
No, Teddy, will you give us just a couple more examples of having explained that to teachers and to students? Like how does understanding these core ideas about how they work help us think about how we might use ChatGPT, these tools in our teaching, or what to avoid, or why, or how to think? How does this help us think better in implementation?
Great. So I think there are a couple things that happen. You can kind of go in either direction with respect to being worried about sentience with this kind of thing, right? On one hand, you're saying it's just predicting the next word. That's not meaningful. On the other hand, there's like a lot of research in neurology that's like, that's how brain works, right? The way that we think is actually in this sort of weird probabilistic sense. So on one hand, it could like kind of make you freak out or make you think this is kind of silly. On the other hand, the thing that I hope this kind of thing does for most people is it makes people less likely to just say, I asked it something and it gave me an answer that was really silly. AI is stupid, right? This is not going to actually help me very much. This is like a third grader. This is not going to be good in some way. Whereas in reality, these things are these super dynamic models that are actually dealing with uncertainty and randomness in a way that leads to really interesting results. And so the main thing I try to tell people when they get to these things is if something seems really wrong, that's not because it's thinking about things wrong. That could be related to how the thing is phrased. That could be related to its current corpus of text. That could be related to whatever your follow-up question should be, right? It's not just a question of, I can evaluate this tool based on how well it does a sort of fixed set of things. That's a way that I think I've thought about it.
And, another answer that I have to that is something like, it helps a little bit explain how bias and hallucination continues to propagate. Like at any point in the sequence of words, it can turn the doctor in a story into a he. It can turn the nurse in the story into a she. And then you're just going to keep going down that pathway. At any point in the story, one of my favorite one recently is I was using this with my class of MIT students. We were asking it some questions about ChatGPT, and it started describing the freshman tradition of Beaver Rush. And all my students were like, I wasn't invited to Beaver Rush. And that's because Beaver Rush isn't real. But it invented Beaver Rush. And then as soon as it had invented Beaver Rush by some, like magical concoction of finding probabilistic relationships between words, as soon as it had selected those words, the next most predictable word was like, oh, Beaver Rush is a fun party. Beaver Rush, people drink a lot. At Beaver Rush, be sure you don't get caught by the cops or things like that. And it will sort of continue down that hallucinatory path. If we shake the box again and ask it to choose a different set of words, maybe one of the most important things is ChatGPT doesn't pick the probabilistically most likely word every time. If it did that, you would get the exact same answer to every question every time. It has a variable which is called temperature, which is basically how much do you want the system to pull out of the variance of possible words. And in some systems, you can actually sort of, influence that yourselves. One of the very best articles written about this, which is just an extension, it's an extension of what Teddy just said, and then it also takes it a little bit further, is by Stephen Wolfram. I forget exactly the blog post title, but it's one word at a time. And it is a great explainer of ChatGPT, but a really nice thing it does is he uploads GPT-2, a much older, simpler version, into Wolfram and does a bunch of demonstrations with it. And it's the thing that I use. My MIT students spend a lot of time studying neural nets, and in some ways they really understand the math of what's happening behind here, and they really don't get it. They still say things like, ChatGPT was thinking about this. No, there's no thinking. There's predicting words in sequence. Oh, it's kind of neat how ChatGPT planned, how that would. No, there's no planning. There's predicting words in sequence. And so I think understanding this can help us. Okay, I wrote a book a few years ago called Failure to Disrupt: Why Technology Alone Can't Transform Education. I was the first full-time research scientist. Andrew Ho in the back hired me to study what was going on when Harvard and MIT came together to form edX. And one of my interests is, what do we imagine is possible with technology? Why are we so often wrong? And what kinds of patterns can we see emerging over and over again? I think it was 1913. I'm going to forget the name of the person who did this because I'm a little bit under the weather. Who's the guy who invented film strips? I'll go back and I'll get you the name in a minute. He stands in front of Congress and he says, in 10 years, there will be no more textbooks in schools. We will only learn through film strips. In just 10 years. He is invited back to Congress in 1923. 10 years later, he says, in 20 years, there will be, I swear, there will be no more textbooks in schools. They will all be replaced by video. It was amazing to me to listen to the panel talk this morning and say so many of the things that we've heard before. You know, Ethan described ChatGPT as the machine, as the machine that can do all of the things that lots of different specialized machines can do. You know, it's not like it's just like a MOOC or just like it can do all these things. That is exactly how Seymour Papert in the 1960s and 1970s described computers. They were the machine. That is why they were going to be so special and so transformative in kids' educations. And you all know this because your Apple II that you studied with in school, that profoundly changed the shape of your learning, right? You know, your schooling was completely different than the generation before you because of your time playing Logo for 20 minutes a week in the Apple II Plus lab. When Ethan said something like, God, MOOCs were so boring, we're going to have these really dynamic ChatGPT experiences, and we can use that to democratize education. The MOOC people said textbooks were boring. And that if we put the textbook in video, like if we had someone stand in front of a room and read what they had written in the textbook, then we were going to engage learners around the world in totally new ways, profound new ways. And Ethan's argument was like, no, it's not the videos that will do it, it's the chatbot. If we can just put kids in front of a chatbot, their natural curiosity will drive them to want to explore all of the things that we teach them, like the conjugation of Spanish verbs and factoring polynomials. It's super boring if you watch a video, but if you talk to a chatbot, that's really what's going to pull us. This is a bet. Like Ethan will give you one bet, I'll give you another bet. That's nonsense. Kids do not want to learn from chatbots. You do not want to learn from chat. I mean, it's possible that there are some things that you are really deeply interested and passionate about. People are actually pretty good at learning that kind of thing on their own, using the resources from the internet, from watching videos, joining forums, things like that. If you want to learn how to beat a level in a video game, if you want to learn how to do your hair in a certain way, if you're really excited about learning to code or learning a language, people are pretty good at teaching themselves that stuff. If you are trying to get someone to learn something that you're making them learn, that the state is making them learn, that's part of their curriculum, they do not want to learn that from inert things. A few of them do. The vast majority of them do not. They want to learn that from human beings. From human beings. Dan Meyer is a math teacher who wrote a great blog post trying to explain to people why things like Conmigo, other kinds of AI tutors, chatbots, were not going to work. When a kid is sitting in your classroom, they're asking themselves two questions all the time. What do I need to do next? And who am I? Those are the two questions that run through our heads all the time as learners. Maybe the chatbots, if they were really good, could help us a little bit with what do I do next. They don't help us with who am I. People help us with who am I. So here are the kinds of predictions that people make all the time. EdTech will destroy the system. That Failure to Disrupt was written sort of in homage to a book that was written here called something about disruptive innovation in education. What was the name of that book? It was the one after The Innovator's Dilemma. It's the education version of it. I'll show you a quote from it in a second. I got it up here. Education technology doesn't destroy our system. Culture and society domesticates education technologies. Everyone thought MOOCs were going to destroy higher education and leave something totally new in their wake. And what the whole system did is be like, actually, you're good for helping people who already have a master's degree get a second master's degree. And we can sell that and we can make some money to do that, but you fit like right here in this little slot. That is what's going to happen with chatbots. We're going to find some little slice that they fit into, that they optimize. And they're not going to transform everything else that you do. We are always hoping that new technology, you heard this morning, that new technologies, especially if they're free and open, will have a democratizing effect. New technologies disproportionately benefit people with the financial, social, and technical capital to take advantage of new innovations. There are a tiny handful of education technology products created by people with a deep commitment to improving the learning of our most marginalized students that sort of help with this. It is one of the hardest problems in education. Random stuff that tech companies throw out in a hurry onto the internet is not going to solve this problem. That's a prediction anyway. Okay, here are two of the most common findings in the history of education technology. These are things I feel really confident you can get on. Failure to Disrupt was published in September of 2020, and I had the page proofs of the book in March of 2020. So the world is starting to shut down. We're about to, schools are closing. We're about to see this like huge wave, and I'm terrified. I'm like, man, what kind of stuff in this book is just going to prove to be totally wrong? What stuff in this book is the pandemic just going to knock out? And I had a bunch of friends read it. I read it. I was like, I think I'm going to stick with it. I think I'm just going to let this one ride. And I think these two things panned out pretty well. When teachers get access to new technologies, they use them to extend existing systems. They use them to do the same kinds of things they were doing before. If you want teachers to do different things, it takes years. It takes coaching, it takes experimentation, it takes practice, it takes support, it takes experimentation. A lot of things that we try don't work. They're bad ideas, we throw them away. The first things that we try are like, I have to take attendance. How can I take attendance faster? I have to do a multiple choice quiz. How can I write the multiple choice quiz faster? They don't change the arc of what we're doing. You can read a great book by Judith Sandholz, published in a little after 1984. The project, the Apple Classrooms of Tomorrow project, was done in 1984. They put these totally brand new Apple II Plus computers in classrooms. They wired them to printers. They wired them to each other. Totally revolutionary stuff. And that was the finding that came out in 1984. And you can find the same finding with smart boards, with projectors, with tablets, with laptop computers, with MOOCs, with a zillion different things. This one's one to bet on. And then when there is beneficial and innovative new practice with education technology, it will disproportionately benefit the affluent. People with the financial, social, technical capital to take advantage of innovation. If you're teaching at Harvard, maybe you're not so worried about that. Like, you got a pretty good crew of affluent folks here to work with. But if you're trying to sort of democratize education, technology in its like naive form is typically not a great place to start. Maybe generative AI will be different, but if you wanted to like make a bet on history, that would not be a good bet to make. One of my favorite stories of this is millions of people have seen Sal Khan's 2011 TED Talk, where he says, let's use video to reinvent education. And he says, what we're going to do is we're going to take kids and we're going to sit them in front of terminals. And the kids at these terminals are going to do math in this algorithmically optimized pace. And they are going to learn on their own personalized trajectory. And a teacher is going to come along periodically and grab groups of them and remediate them or do cool projects. But this is going to revolutionize education. Many fewer people, as it turns out, have read Sal Khan's interview in 2019 with District Administration magazine. District Administration magazine doesn't have the reach that TED does. So between 2011 and 2019, Khan forms his own school, builds his own building, hires his own staff, has total control of the system, and does that vision work? Now that I run a school, I see that some of the stuff is not as easy to accomplish compared to how it sounds theoretically. What did Khan do? He said, what actually kind of works is having people do regular math 4 days a week and do 1 day a week of online practice problems. I was like, let's see, that's doable, gets improved results. Man, I feel like I've read that somewhere before. This is a 1994 paper by Ken Kadinger called Intelligent Tutoring Goes to School in the Big City, where like using big desktop computers with preloaded software, they brought them into Pittsburgh. They tried to get the teachers to do 3 days a week of regular teaching and 2 days a week of practice problems. And they were like, how about 1 day a week of practice problems? And the researchers were like, well, I guess that's okay then. They get like 10, 20% improved scores at the end of the year, which is basically what Khan reports, although Khan doesn't actually do published studies that we can see. But, another way to say this is like what Sal Khan discovered in 10 years and $150 million of philanthropic investment you could have figured out with a trip to the library. So take your trips to the library. There is a lot that we have learned over the past 3 decades about new technology that's going to help inform what we try to do with generative AI. If you're taking generative AI and bringing it into a language class, there's tons that's written about technology and language. If you're taking generative AI into class about creativity and design, there's tons that's written about creative design, about math, about all these kinds. Math, I think, is going to be a profound example. As soon as ChatGPT came out, all of my math teacher friends were like, now it's your turn. Like, oh, you're telling me there's a machine that answers all the questions that we typically give to students and does it correctly but doesn't give any intuition about how it does it? Oh, I bet that would be hard. And math teachers figured out calculators. They figured out a few things. Bands don't work. Banning is a dumb idea. Banning is like teaching children how to use VPNs, which is like kind of a good thing to do, but just go ahead and teach them how to use VPNs. Unlimited use of a new tool usually is also not a great idea. What math teachers came up with was this idea that like in certain parts of our curriculum, we wall ourselves off from tools that do too much thinking for us. We still make you memorize your addition tables, your subtraction tables, your multiplication tables. You need faster than Google access to that. You need faster than GPT access to that. I think we're going to find similar things with writing, with creativity, with coding, with other stuff like that, that there's some places where, especially once we've developed some fundamental mastery, it's good to let people use these new tools. And there's other places where it's not quite a ban, but it's like a walled off area where we say, no, like just do this writing with me. Do the writing in class. Do this writing at home, but for this one, really don't use ChatGPT. I mean it. Maybe you will, but really you shouldn't, because I'm going to try to help you develop something, and then maybe you can have more technology tools that get incorporated over time. There's a great book by Morgan Ames called The Charisma Machine about the One Laptop Per Child initiative, and she contrasts two stances that people take towards technology. One she calls the charismatic stance. Technology is going to disrupt and transform existing systems. The future will be new and different because of new technology. That is 2011 Sal Khan. 2019 District Administrator Sal Khan is the tinkering stance. Existing systems get domesticated by new technology. The future is an extension from history. If we learn what we've done with technologies in the past, that can help us think about where we might meaningfully make gains in the future. It is sad that human development is incredibly hard. It is sad that our best initiatives, get us 0.1 effect size, better test scores, get us 2% better graduation rate. There's a great article in the Boston Globe today that says that in Cambridge, Massachusetts, their MCAS scores in 2022 were the same as 2019. That they had basically sort of bridged their learning loss. How did they explain it? Like, what was the big magical thing they did? Nothing. They did 100 little things right, and they spent $1 zillion doing it. They gave teachers a bunch of money. They hired a bunch of extra people. They spent a bunch of individual time with students, and things got a little bit better. That is what, if you have a mental model of how ChatGPT is going to help, I would encourage you to embrace this kind of tinkering stance. There's stuff that we're going to do that works, but it's not going to be this big breakthrough, transformative, everything is different. So I wrote a book which is you should do this tinkering thing, but didn't really explain it. So I wrote another book, which came out 2 days ago, called Iterate, The Secret to Innovation in Schools, which is so how would you do this kind of thing? If there is no one in your group, your faculty, your department, your school, your team, who's messing around with this stuff, I also don't think that's a good idea. I think going to a department and saying this is inevitable, we all must do it, I don't think that's a productive solution. There's lots of technologies that we've told teachers that were inevitable. I spent a lot of time about a decade ago telling folks that I thought social media was going to be an incredibly important new part of education, and I'm basically atoning for that now. Social media was much shittier than I thought it was going to be. I think we could find in a decade that AI is much shittier than we thought it was going to be. And if it is, we should get rid of it. And we should remember that the people who are telling us that it's inevitable are often hired by Google and Bard and Microsoft and OpenAI. There are probably, however, some good things that we could find. And if we embrace this tinkering mindset, if we think to the past, if we try to figure out what's worked in our discipline with technology before, how can we accentuate that? What are some new things that we can try? I think that's going to be the right direction to go. But that's just my advice, and other people have other advice. And Newman has spent a bunch of time talking and listening to people who have been trying new kinds of things in their schools and departments. So let's listen to her.
Thank you, Justin. Hi, everybody. I'm Newman. Okay, can you hear me? I probably don't need to shout. I'm really happy to be here, and we're excited to hear from all of you about your perspectives, and I'm going to share a little bit more about some of mine. But first, I want to poll the room. Who here is an educator? Who here is a student? Who here is neither an educator nor a student? Okay, great. Well, we're really happy to have you. I hope that this is beneficial to everybody. What I'm going to be focusing on is some creative and pedagogical AI interventions. And maybe I'll take a kind of a in-between pathway to some of what you heard from Justin and some of what you heard earlier this morning. I am the director of art and education at MetaLab at Harvard. We've been thinking about AI and other technologies for a long time. And I started teaching workshops that integrate philosophical ideas and AI technologies and artistic practices back in 2017. And you'll see just up here, like, this is well before people were thinking about AI actually being a judge, but some people were thinking about what are the implications of these technologies. So this was the Supreme Court. This was made in one of my workshops in 2017. And, these are some of the other workshops that have happened, but if we bring art and design practice and the asking of questions to new technologies, essentially what do the humanities have to offer new technologies? And we've done a bunch of exhibitions that I organized over the years, and this was a little bit before the current hype and current craze. But what we were always doing was thinking, as much hype as there may be, what are the critical questions we need to be asking? What are the questions around responsibility, around agency, around the benefits, who the benefits go to and who the benefits do not go to, because they do not distribute evenly. And the things I'm going to talk about today are how educators are responding from the research that we've been doing, and some recommendations that I want to offer for you all as educators or leaders or students even, and then some examples of things you might try. One of the things that's hard about these conversations is the fact that there is a diversity of perspectives, just like the general public is all over the map in terms of how they feel about AI, and that is informed by who they are, where they sit, what their level of education is, what their friends are thinking, what they're reading, and probably just their general perspectives about technology in the first place. The same is true for educators, and the same is true for students. So one thing I would say is to be cautious around somebody who speaks about educators or students as a monolith. Students want this, students think this. Which students? There's a lot of students that don't agree on these things, and same with educators. So I think that's one thing to note and appreciate, is that educators feel differently, and that's informed by many things. And if we're talking about them, we need to talk about them and their diversity. As Justin mentioned, I am leading this project called the AI Pedagogy Project at MetaLab. We're going to be launching in a couple of weeks. It's a curated repository of assignments from educators around the world who are bringing AI into their teaching, but doing so critically. So it's not just about celebrating, what these new shiny tools can do, but rather thinking about, what does it mean that they do these things? What are the implications for the field? How can these innovations reflect back on a particular domain? And as we've been working on this, we've been talking to a number of educators. Maha Bali is doing really terrific work in this field. If you're not following her, you should be. She's based at the American University in Cairo. And this is a quote from an interview we did with her. "We shouldn't be focused on catching students using AI. We should be teaching them how they might end up needing to use AI in the world. What kind of literacies do we need to develop so students use AI in the right way, at the right time, and for the right purpose?" She also coined the term critical AI literacy, which we've now been using at the AI Pedagogy Project. We've put together some recommendations for educators. We actually overlap with some of the recommendations Christina shared earlier this morning, but some are different, and I'm going to share highlights from a few of those with you all. These are on the AI Pedagogy Project website, which again we'll be launching. And these are our recommendations. Learn the AI basics, know the affordances and limitations of the tools, create a policy and do so in dialogue with your students. Students the one thing I think students do agree on is they want clarity and they want reasoning. I guess that's two things. They want clarity because a lot of students are confused because probably their teachers might be a little confused, but they want clarity and they want reasoning behind the policies. But anyway, if you create a policy, do so in dialogue with your students and ask your students for feedback on that. Using a critical approach, I'm highlighting a few. What does that mean? Always asking about how the technology was made, who it might be hurting, who's profiting from it, what data it might be collecting. As you're using the tools, even when they do a good job at something, be asking those questions, and students should be asking those questions. Another important one is lead with trust. Unfortunately, a lot of the conversations that I've been a part of in education are not giving students enough credit for the learners that they are. And like, what is the purpose of education in the first place? And I was talking to Andrew about this last night. What is the purpose of education? Why are students in university, or why are students in graduate school? If your students are tempted to cheat, chances are you're not educating them in the way that they need to be educated. So let's use it as an opportunity to level ourselves up as educators. And instead of assuming that everybody's going to be cheating, I do agree with Ethan from this morning about the AI detection tools are terrible and not to use those, but also have conversations with your students about what they want to learn and how they learn best. And I think the future of education is helping students learn how they learn best. Another one that's really important, and I hope I'm doing this too, is approaching with humility. We should appreciate experts, and we should also be skeptical of people who say with certainty anything about the future, including how much social media, for example, will influence education or not. We should be approaching these things with humility. We should be knowing that experts get it wrong all the time. There's mixed incentives for the stories you might hear through the technology companies. Technology companies are profiting tremendously from these tools, and not just profiting financially, but also profiting in terms of the amount of data they're able to collect. And connected with approach with humility, plan for change. And Christina also touched on this morning. It is really important for us to be thinking about, like, recognizing the fact that these technologies will continue to evolve, they'll continue to change, and I would caution, again, this is for educators, against having one policy that you say, like, okay, I'm done thinking about AI, that's it. It's like, get feedback from your students, plan to update things every semester. MetaLab published a proposed code of conduct for AI, which is you can find on our website, and it'll be linked on the AI pedagogy project. And planning for change was that we co-wrote with students as an in-class exercise. And planning for change is a big part of it. We're going to need to be responsive to the era that we're in. And so I actually just added that to the list. So now we have 8 instead of 7. The last thing I'm going to share with you before we open it up to your all questions is some sample assignments. I probably didn't sufficiently underscore like the humanities perspective that the AI pedagogy project takes. I'm actually going to give you, the last thing will be a little preview of the AI pedagogy project. But we're really, my background is in art and philosophy. I've been working in AI for a while, but really coming at it with a humanistic lens. And as much as the STEM fields are able to help innovate, there's a lot that the humanities and the arts, including history, for example, bring to bear on these conversations. And we want to equip educators, especially educators in the humanities, to learn the AI basics and do all of these things, but also think about how they might integrate AI into their teaching. How might an AI tool reflect back the biases of your discipline? How might you ask questions differently or ask new questions? So I'm going to share with you some sample assignments. Have students design an assignment that simultaneously leverages and critiques an AI tool. I actually have this as a course. I think this would be a really cool course to have the first half of the semester. Each of the students is designing and workshopping an assignment that's doing both, leveraging and critiquing an AI tool. And then the second half of the semester, they each guest teach the class with their assignment. Wouldn't that be a cool course? Okay, so maybe anybody's welcome to do that too. This is the code of conduct exercise I mentioned. In groups, ask students to design an AI code of conduct for your course or for your school. And then, after they've done so, workshop their codes of conduct with an LLM. Ask for counterpoints, ask for feedback. Ask the LLM to take on different personae and see how it responds to the code of conduct. Ask the LLM to say, you're a dishonest, cheating student. What would you say about this code of conduct? Or you're trying to, get creative with it. These are summarized very high level for the purpose of this presentation. And the last one, and I attribute this a bit to Juliana Castro, who's sitting here, is to find a glitch or a mistake in an LLM or an image generation tool and speculate what it reveals about the biases in the training data. Julia and I co-taught a course in January around collaborating with AI. And this particular image is from DALL-E, and it's trying to render a fork on top of a plate. But DALL-E isn't able, at least it wasn't, and I think it's still not, because I actually had some people try it last week. It wasn't able to put a plate on top of a fork. Sorry, you're asking it to put a plate on top of a fork, and this is what it comes up with. And you could try it. And the other image generation tools have a similar problem. So you find the glitch, but then like, what does it mean? Like, why can't it do this? So it's not just the finding of the glitch and the novelty of the tool, and this particular thing is really neat and cool, and let's talk about it. The second layer and the most important part is to ask why and be critical of that. Why can't it? I mean, I'm sure you all, somebody here knows. Why can't it put a plate on top of a fork?
No image was trained.
Yeah, well, I think what I heard, which is correct, is it hasn't seen it. It's not sufficiently represented in the training data. It's so overweighing, and it relates to Teddy's demo earlier. It's like there's so many, and I've tried all sorts of things, like ceramic disc on top of a three-pronged utensil. I mean, you try it all the creative ways, and it's just there's so many images of utensils on top of plates that it can't generate image. Now, this is obviously a very benign example, but many of the examples are not benign. So there are biases in these, but as an exercise, speculate what it reveals about the biases in the training data. So there's just some examples. The last thing I'm going to show you is what the AI pedagogy project is going to look like. You'll have to ignore these images because these are just placeholders, which is pretty obvious. It's really a curated collection of assignments, and you'll be able to select. You can sort by AI theme. You can sort by subject. You can sort by tools. And you can sort by skills or learning outcomes, the type of skills that folks will be working on. And then it will give you some assignments with attribution to educators who have already published about their assignments that you can either adapt or use directly in your courses. We plan for this to be an ongoing thing. There's a placeholder there. You can sign up to get notified when we launch. We're launching in early October, aipedagogy.org. And I think with that, we're going to open it up to you all for questions. Thanks.
Great. What are you working on? What are you excited about? Ellen's got a mic, and what are you working on? What are you excited about? What do you want to know more about? What did we say that was wrong and stupid? What were our hallucinations?
Hi, thank you for your talk. Professor Teddy mentioned where the data came from. My question is related with low and middle income countries. We have a problem because sometimes that countries don't have enough data, don't have enough publishable papers. So how we need to fill that gap to make more accessible global knowledge in the ecosystem of artificial intelligence?
So my short response is I think your characterization of it is exactly right, that these models are trained on the data that's most available. I don't know if you've heard the sort of idea of the streetlight effect. The idea is somebody's on the ground on the street, like fumbling around near a streetlight, and someone passes by and said, "What are you looking for?" And they said, "My keys." And they said, "Where'd you drop them?" And they said, "2 blocks that way." And they said, "Why are you looking here?" And they say, "Well, the light's much better over here." And the idea that we naturally treat the data that's available to us as the representative data of whatever corpus we're trying to get, I think is really profoundly at the center of these problems. I think getting to what Justin was saying, that this notion that it'll sort of happen on its own or it'll propagate in this way that will kind of naturally be for the benefit of all, I think Justin's exactly right, that without explicit hard work to do this kind of thing well, it's just not going to happen. And the challenge is that a lot of the development of these models, it's very hard to imagine an effective public alternative just because they're so resource intensive, and each of the companies that have been working on these have really siloed up since this has started. They've been a lot less public about what they're actually doing and how they're doing it. And so the way to actually get to take the effort to harvest this kind of data or get this kind of information from all over the world and try to make these models better, I think this requires a huge investment from the public, from the world, maybe this international organization type of coordination type of effort. But I do think that's what's needed.
Hi, this is Dustin Tingley. You had to listen to me this morning.
We got to. It was nice.
I'd be curious the panel's reflections on how we might be using tools like these to help students find their own voice or their own tone. I feel like, from a student kind of life cycle and maturation process, that's one of the things that we want our students to discover. And yet, right now, a lot of the discourse is write this as if it's Drake, or, write this as if it's Shakespeare. And I'm all about using these tools, but I also want students to be discovering their own voice, their own tone, their own sort of rhythm, if you will. And some of that can eventuate in speaking, in the sort of revisiting the oral tradition of, academic and intellectual communication. But in the writing format, I mean, I just always remark when I come across a student who has found their own voice in their own writing, and it's just always been so lovely. And I just wonder where you guys see this fitting in. Is there any lessons from the past technologies that could speak to that? Thank you.
So, yeah, this is a terrific question. I think this goes back to something I said earlier. There's a lot of diversity in terms of how students learn or how students find their voice or how they discover creativity. So I would be inclined, and I think Justin will speak to sort of past lessons, I would be inclined to give an assignment where they had to interact. They were maybe there were steps to the assignment, and one is without using an AI tool, come up, write 5 lines about something rather and try to be creative about it. Then separately use an AI tool. Then do it again, but use the AI tool first, and then edit it. I'm trained as an artist, and I feel like some artists want a blank canvas. They want a blank slate, just like some people want to start with a blank page. Some artists want to cut apart a dictionary and throw the words up in the air and see how they land. And I think acknowledging that part of finding your voice is learning about what your own creative process is and making sure to reinforce for students that what Teddy's creative process is and what Justin's creative process is and what Newman's creative process is will be different. And that's healthy and that's good, but learn for yourself. And so I would be inclined to give some sort of classroom experiments, even in-class experiments, to have them try different pathways toward writing. And writing is a tricky one, admittedly, and then do a meta-reflection on it. I think sort of metacognition and meta-reflection is going to be really important as we move forward. So they're not only seeing what the particular outcome is, but sort of theorizing about why. I bet Justin has more to add on that.
I've had a ton of fun asking young people. So I teach in media studies, which is a really easy place to play around with generative AI because our job is just to have people screw around with new technologies. So if you teach biology or something, it's probably harder. But I did an assignment that was very close to sort of critique and leverage, where use AI to make an argument about AI. Go. And the kid who was super into puzzles in his life made a puzzle room, basically like a prompt injection attack. I was surprised at how many students were really interested in criminality and violations of ethics and sort of the dark side of AI. I had someone who basically red teamed, how would I impersonate someone's voice and ruin their life? And he came up with a great system for doing that. And the whole time he all of his presentations and papers had a break every few paragraphs to be I can't believe I can do this. I can't believe how easy this is. I know nothing about this. I can't believe I can do this. So I don't know if that was a voice that was good to encourage him to discover, but he found that path. And I think for almost any of these questions, we are going to find that there's a lot of cool education researchers who've studied and explored this thing. Your question makes me think about work that Howard Gardner and folks at Project Zero and Arts and Education did around developing aesthetics. Which is there are systematic ways of helping people develop their sense of aesthetic. You get them to look at a range of things and decide which ones they like and which ones they don't, and to be able to articulate why. If you want to help people develop tone, help them think about which tones they like and which tones they don't like, or here's a range of them. Here's why I like this. Here's why I like that. Where do I want to move in that direction? Your question, Dustin, makes me think this is probably one of those areas where, as part of the learning sequence, we want to wall them off from these tools. If what you want is for people to evoke what's inside them or something that's really deeply important to them, don't give them crutches that let something else make words for them. And I think math teachers have figured out how to do this. I think lots of other educators have figured out how to say, in our classes, sometimes we use these things and sometimes we don't. And we develop trust with students so that when we tell them not to, they think it's good for them and they get excited about it. Developing your own tone seems like a pretty easy sell to learners to get them to do some writing on their own.
Can I just add one quick thought, which is, I think this is from a strictly tactical perspective, so not, where's AI going and all this stuff. But right now, it's worth noting that most of the prompts that we come up with and most of the prompts that we experiment with are like pretty shockingly short, right? We are embedding so many assumptions and letting the ChatGPT kind of figure it out for themselves. The more you give it scaffolding with respect to I want to make sure that my response has these qualities or does this kind of thing, the better. So in my course, I teach statistics, but we really value being able to explain things in accessible terms. We use the phrase, tell this to a policymaker who's curious but not well-versed in statistics, over and over and over and over again. The thing I've been experimenting with is designing a prompt wherein it asks you to explain a concept to a policymaker using a real-world example, and then ask it to give you feedback on not just how correct you were, but how accessible the language was, or if you think it's understandable. And that part of trying to actually give it a rubric to assess how well you did is the vast majority of the prompt. And I think that's something that, as we start to like experiment with this, and you think about how to do it in your own courses, think about what kinds of additional scaffolding you can put in the prompt to make sure that you're actually giving people an opportunity to experiment.
Hi, so I actually want to do a follow-up on Dustin, if I can. I'm a social scientist, kind of apprehensive about teaching the nuance that social science is trying to do. It was rather striking this morning to hear that Caltech is not happy with AI, which is, I'm thinking, looking at more direct answers. But if you read the people who critique the alignment issue, Chomsky from your department, a lot of linguists think about this unalignment between what we want to do as educators in educating the human brain versus what the machine can offer us. So if you read Gary Marcus, if you read Chomsky, if you read the new book that just came out by Barron, who's a linguist, it's disturbing. How do we continue to ensure that these human skills are taught in the classroom when more and more of the AI is brought in and it's not ready? That's what I want to ask you about.
I mean, historically, educational institutions, I think, there are many of them that have done a good job of saying, let's be deliberate about addressing that. Like, there are new technologies. Let's make sure that there are some faculty in our department who are using these things in a whole hog exploratory way. And then if there are faculty in our department who have really developed some facility teaching students well-honed fundamental skills in traditional ways, let's keep doing that too. I mean, I think I disagree with the Secretary of Education when he says that every teacher who doesn't use AI is going to be replaced by AI. That has not been the case in any previous generation of technology. There have been, one of the best things that we can now, where I think students get disappointed, get left behind, when we don't serve them well, is when we do it more haphazardly than deliberately. If a student's path through a department, through a course of study, like has you bouncing around to a bunch of different faculty and you happen to find all the AI nerds or you happen to find all the traditionalists, I think that's less good than when a department says, let's think about typical sequences that students go through and let's make sure that there are certain parts of that sequence where we're doing like the most cutting edge stuff that we can, that has some really interesting experimentation to it. And let's have some parts of that sequence where we preserve the very best of what we've been doing with people for a long time. I think if there are folks who are sitting in this room thinking to themselves like, I just don't want to do this. Like, I've been teaching stuff for a long time and I'm pretty good at it and I think it helps. I think those people can be enormously valuable in faculty, especially when they're paired and they partnered with other folks who are like, yeah, let's do really different kind of cutting edge sorts of things. I don't know. That's advice that I typically give and could be totally wrong.
Hi, thank you very much for your refreshing perspective. So I'm a case writer, and I've been a case writer for 30 years. 30 years ago, we used to write about case protagonists like robots. They tended to worry about shareholder value. Now we write about humans. We add markers of identity. We write cases about social issues and climate change. I was struck in your examples. You mentioned bias, but your examples were singularly benign. So we were talking about plates. When I put in, female doctor, I have a Barbie with a stethoscope. So these biases come up. What is your guidance to writers like me in using tools like these to make sure that we do not reinforce the biases that we are supposed to be watching out for? And thank you for your refreshing perspectives.
Yeah. I can start. Yeah, of course. I know that, the benign plate on top of a fork is not what we need to be concerned about. I think to answer your question about writing, it depends on how you're using the tools. So, I bet knowing what the affordances are of the tools, what they can do, where the training data came from, what they cannot do or cannot do well is really important if you're going to be using them in your practice. So I feel like they're a little bit more, I think they're useful. I don't know. I think it really depends on how you're using them. So I wouldn't, if you want to give, in the kind of bias you're trying to mitigate against, I would say don't trust anything that comes out of a large language model. It needs external validation, period. It needs external validation. You need to check anything that comes out of a model with reliable sources if you're trying to talk about fact. And I think there's a deeper question of why are you using a model to generate something that's meant to be factual in the first place? Like I don't think they should be research tools. I think there's differences of opinion on that. I do not think they should be research tools. They're not drawing from accurate data. They're drawing from garbage from the internet, and the internet is filled with garbage. And a lot of that garbage is really misogynistic, racist, homophobic, and more. We see, what is going on the internet, and that is the training data, at least predating 2021. So I think that if you use the tools in specific ways for targeted outcomes, to provide a potential counterpoint or to take on a persona of some other sort, to maybe even creatively prompt you in some way. But I don't think that they should be used as research tools. And I think, at least right now, and I don't think in the near future, even if they're mostly accurate, that's not sufficient for anybody, except if you're a creative and you're writing fiction. But I would love to hear from Teddy and Justin on this.
The short thing I'll just say is that I think a lot of the innovations in machine learning and data science in the past couple decades, one of the most useful things about them has been not just illustrating how they themselves are biased, but I think they've actually helped us understand bias in the kinds of things that we produce ourselves. So I think a lot of the use of algorithms to help make bail decisions, for example, has been the subject of a lot of really interesting research. And one of the implications of it are that currently, bail decisions are also immensely biased in a lot of important ways. So I don't think that these models will make it easier to be unbiased, but I just want to make sure that when we build this kind of ability to do this that Newman's suggesting, which I think is really important, to also make sure that we then bring that into our own practice of things that we do completely without generative AI as well.
Thank you. This is really thought-provoking. And what I was really struck by all of your presentations is how although AI can be generative, it's not really creative. So I think it's also really interesting when we think that if the ideas that are generated by ourselves when compared to AI is not that different, it can really be frustrating for us and can throw us into existential crisis. So I'm just wondering how to leverage tools like generative AI to help students to be more creative and to also help us as educators to be more creative. And the second question is, how should the goals and the priorities in education change in response to new technologies like generative AI?
I'll start with the first one. Here's a hypothesis I have. Human beings are very, very bad at guessing what AI will be good at. If you had asked AI professionals 10 years ago, are you going to be able to train a car to be able to make a left-hand turn against traffic? They would be like, absolutely. That is a totally tractable problem. That is a problem that I can take any 15-year-old and in a week or two get them to be able to solve with 99% proficiency, and cars can't really do it. On the other hand, if you had asked people 3 years ago, can we invent a machine that can generate the parody song lyrics on any topic in the style of any artist who has their material available for scraping on the internet, you'd be like, that sounds impossible. And we created this totally cockamamie, predict one word at a time kind of scheme. And ChatGPT is really, really good at doing it, and all the other things are. So for a question like, how is generative AI going to aid the development of human creativity? I would follow Newman's advice of bringing a lot of humility to that question. We don't know. I would totally believe that there could be breakthroughs along that lines. I think we're definitely going to have artists who create all kinds of amazing things with generative AI that we will describe as genuinely creative, genuinely important, genuinely interesting. the other thing that generative AI is going to do is going to flood the world with medium and low quality garbage at a rate that we've never seen before. I don't know if any of you saw, weeks after ChatGPT, there was a small science fiction magazine that had to stop accepting submissions because they were flooded by, everybody says these tools are going to be a time saver, but they're going to be an enormous time sink for those of us who have to evaluate like the garbage that flows out of these systems. So there'll be winners and losers. But I wouldn't give up on the tools for something like creativity. I would try to put myself in spaces where there's some experimentation that's going on, but also we know a bunch of stuff about how to develop human creativity, and we should keep doing those things that we know work. And then on the question that you had related to education, I do think that for all of us who prepare people to do things in the real world, we should watch closely how new AI tools are changing the labor market. My hunch is that we'll find that there are all kinds of things that humans remain better at doing than AI is, much like we found over the last 3 decades that there's all kinds of things that humans are better at doing than computers are doing. And we should teach people how to do those things. Wherever our comparative advantage lies, let's stick with that. We got the Time's Up message from our colleagues in the back, and you all are probably hungry. So it was wonderful to be able to spend some time with you this morning, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.